The sound of the slap echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot, and in that single frozen second, every head turned, every breath stopped, and a woman named Marisol Vance realized she had just struck a man whose name alone could end careers, empty bank accounts, and, as she would later learn, end lives. She stood there with her palms still stinging, her chest heaving, staring into the cold gray eyes of Damian Cole, a man the tabloids called ruthless and the underworld called something far darker, and she had no idea that the quiet fury simmering behind his expression was not the fury of a billionaire insulted, but the fury of a king unaccustomed to being touched by anyone who was not already sworn to obey him. If this story moves something in you, if you still believe that kindness can survive in a world engineered for cruelty, then do something for me right now. Smash that like button, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs a reminder that good hearts still exist, and subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales so you never miss a story like this one. And I would love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Type your city below, because somewhere out there, someone watching this exact moment might be sitting in the same kind of storm Marisol was about to walk into. Marisol was 26 years old, and she had spent the last 4 years of her life folding towels, mopping floors, and smiling through exhaustion at the Aurelia Grand Hotel, one of the most extravagant establishments in the city, the kind of place where a single night's stay cost more than her monthly rent. She was not born into money. She had grown up in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a grandmother who told her every single night that dignity was the one thing poverty could never steal, as long as she refused to let it. Marisol carried those words like armor. She was polite to guests who screamed at her over cold coffee, patient with children who spilled juice on freshly cleaned carpets, and endlessly kind to the elderly widow in room 412 who called the front desk every night just to have someone to talk to. That evening, the lobby was glittering with its usual parade of wealth, women in gowns that cost more than Marisol's education, men in tailored suits discussing deals that would never touch the lives of people like her. And in the middle of all that gleaming excess stood an old man named Elias Whitfield, a retired schoolteacher who had come to the city to see his granddaughter graduate, dressed in a suit that had clearly been pressed with love but worn thin by years. He had accidentally bumped into a table, spilling a glass of wine onto the sleeve of a man in a black tailored jacket, and that man was Damian Cole. Damian did not simply express annoyance. He unleashed a torrent of humiliation onto Elias in front of the entire lobby, calling him pathetic, worthless, a stain on a place he did not belong in, his voice sharp enough to cut skin. Elias, trembling, tried to apologize, his voice breaking as he explained he was only there for his granddaughter, and still Damian did not relent, stepping closer, his voice rising, his finger pointed like a blade at the old man's chest. Guests watched. Staff watched. No one moved, because everyone in that lobby understood, in the silent language of power, that Damian Cole was not a man you interrupted. Except Marisol. She did not know who he was. She did not care. She saw an old man being torn apart in public for the crime of an accident, and something inside her, something forged by her grandmother's voice and her mother's sacrifices, refused to stay silent. She stepped between them, placed a hand gently on Elias's shoulder, and told Damian, in a voice that shook but did not break, that he had no right to speak to another human being that way, that money did not grant him permission to humiliate the vulnerable, that if he had one shred of decency he would apologize instead of performing his anger like a king holding court. Damian turned his rage on her instead, mocking her uniform, her position, her audacity to speak to him as if she were his equal. And when he sneered that people like her existed to serve people like him, something inside Marisol snapped, not out of hatred, but out of years of swallowed dignity finally reaching its limit. Her hand moved before her mind could stop it, and the slap landed across his face with a force that silenced the entire lobby. The following 10 seconds felt like 10 years. Damian's security detail moved instantly, hands reaching for her arms, the hotel manager rushing forward pale as a ghost, whispering apologies before he even understood what had happened. Marisol stood her ground, refusing to look away, refusing to shrink, even as her mind screamed at her that she had just destroyed everything she had built. Damian raised a hand, and the guards halted instantly, as though a switch had been flipped. He studied her, not with the fury she expected, but with something unreadable, something almost curious, the way a predator studies something that dared to move first. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked away, his security trailing behind him like shadows, leaving the lobby in stunned silence and leaving Marisol standing there with her heart hammering against her ribs, uncertain whether she had just done something brave or something that would end her life as she knew it. She was fired within the hour. The hotel manager, shaking, told her it wasn't personal, that corporate had already called, that Mr. Cole's people had specifically requested her termination, and that he had no choice but to comply if he wanted to keep his own job. Marisol walked out of the Aurelia Grand with a small box of her belongings and no severance, no reference, and no idea how she would pay rent in 11 days. Elias tried to find her outside, tried to thank her, tried to apologize for the position she'd been put in because of him, but Marisol only managed a tired smile and told him that some things were worth losing a job over. She did not know that Elias Whitfield was not simply a retired schoolteacher. She did not know that decades ago, before choosing a quiet life of chalkboards and children, he had been the man who raised Damien Cole after Damien's own father was murdered in a war between crime families, the man who had taught a frightened, orphaned 12-year-old boy that strength without mercy was simply another name for tyranny. Damien had lost touch with him over the years, buried under empire building and blood debts, but the moment he saw Elias's trembling hands in that lobby, something ancient and buried had cracked open inside him, and that was the truth Marisol had unknowingly stumbled into the middle of. 3 days later, a black car appeared outside the modest apartment building where Marisol lived. She assumed, with a sinking heart, that it was a lawyer sent to threaten her into silence, or worse, someone sent to make sure she never spoke of that night again. Instead, the man who stepped out was Damien Cole himself, dressed down, without his usual armor of arrogance, standing awkwardly on a cracked sidewalk that his kind of money rarely touched. He asked if he could speak with her, and though every instinct told her to shut the door, something in his eyes, tired, almost human, made her hesitate. He told her, standing there in the fading evening light, that no one had spoken to him the way she had in 15 years, that everyone around him was too afraid, too hungry for his money, too aware of what he was capable of. He told her that the old man she defended had once saved his life in ways she could never imagine, and that watching a stranger stand up for him with nothing to gain and everything to lose had shaken something loose in him that he thought had died a long time ago. He said he came to apologize, not because his people told him to, but because he wanted to, for perhaps the first time in years. Marisol did not soften easily. She told him that an apology did not undo the cruelty she witnessed, that money could not purchase the dignity he had tried to strip from an old man in public, and that she did not care who he was or what he controlled, because right and wrong did not bend for wealth. Damien, to her shock, did not argue. He simply nodded, told her she was right, and asked if she would allow him to make things right, not with money thrown carelessly at a problem, but with something real. Over the following weeks, Marisol learned pieces of the truth in careful fragments, first that Damien had personally ensured Elias received the healthcare and dignity his teacher's pension could never afford, then that Damien had, without her knowledge, funded a full scholarship in her name at the local community college where her younger brother dreamed of studying engineering, and finally, delivered through a trembling, disbelieving phone call from the very manager who fired her, that the Aurelia Grand had reversed her termination and quietly promoted her into a supervisory position, an offer that had clearly come from someone far above hotel corporate. She confronted Damien about it, angry that he had inserted himself into her life without asking, and he told her something that stayed with her long after that conversation ended, that for years he had built an empire on fear because fear was the only currency he trusted, but watching her slap him in front of a room full of people who worshipped his power had reminded him that respect, real respect, could never be bought, only earned, and that he wanted, for the first time since he was a frightened boy watching his father die, to earn something instead of simply taking it. It was only months later, after Marisol had begun cautiously allowing this strange, complicated man into her life, not as a rescuer, never as a rescuer, but slowly, carefully, as someone worth knowing, that she learned the full truth of who Damien Cole really was, the empire he commanded in the shadows, the blood and fear that had built his fortune. She was terrified. She nearly walked away. But she remembered the man who stood awkwardly on her cracked sidewalk, the man who quietly paid for an old teacher's dignity without demanding recognition, the man who had spent his entire adult life being feared and had never once, until she slapped him, been challenged into remembering he could still choose to be good. Their story was never simple, and it was never without danger, because a man like Damien Cole did not simply walk away from the life he built, and shadows from his past would come looking for the woman who had softened him. But through every threat, every sleepless night, every moment Marisol questioned whether her heart had led her somewhere reckless, she held on to the truth her grandmother taught her, that dignity, once given away freely to protect someone else, has a way of coming back tenfold, in forms you could never have imagined. If this story has touched even a small corner of your heart tonight, if it reminded you that one moment of courage can change the direction of an entire life, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment telling me what part moved you the most, and share it with someone who needs to believe in kindness again. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something special. Comment the words, "second chances," below if you believe people like Damien can truly change, and if you believe a single act of courage, like Marisol's, can shift the entire course of someone's life. In the end, Marisol never regretted that slap, not once, not even when she understood the danger it invited into her life, because it taught her, and eventually taught Damien, that the loudest power in any room is not wealth, not fear, and not control, but the quiet, unshakable courage of someone willing to stand up for a stranger with nothing to gain. And sometimes, that single act of defiance is exactly what it takes to turn a monster back into a man.